Hi there, warm welcome. You're watching Blueprint Exclusive. Well, is the world on the brink of an apocalypse? Remember the aftermath of the 1991 Gulf War? It was the largest ever oil spill in history of humanity. After Iraq dumped 10 million barrels of oil into the Gulf and set the Kuwaiti oil fields on fire. It blackened over 1,000 kilometers of the coastline. The oil contaminated and then killed close to 100,000 seabirds and thousands of fish, turtles, dolphins. Unfortunately, we are again on the brink of another apocalypse, it seems. Because even as we speak, the skies over Tehran have turned black, not metaphorically, but quite literally, that you can see on your screens on the right-hand side. After Israeli strikes on 30 Iranian oil depots, massive fires have now sent toxic smoke and hydrocarbons into the atmosphere. Residents today woke up to oily black acid-like rain falling across the city. Is this what modern warfare looks like now? Where missiles don't just hit targets, they are poisoning the very air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and of course the soil that we live on. But who really caused it? Was it Israel acting alone? Is Trump angry with Netanyahu for this oil mess that we see? Well, tonight we are going to decode it all. All the strikes, the smoke, the geopolitics, and the looming specter of an economic, not economic, but an ecological doom, which is on our heads. The visuals on your screen are from near, let's get you, from near Iraq's oil depot. This is the Upscale oil depot that you can see the shots on. You can see the impact of the Israeli strike near the facility. Fire and thick plumes of smoke, as you can see, lit up the air. They spread all over, across all parts of the city. And these stunning visuals are of the Sahran oil depot, again in Iran. The strikes on this depot sent the flaming oil down storm drains along the streets in Tehran. As you can see, even the storm drains were on fire. This is the river of fire that you can see, water which was on fire. Because of this, the streets of Tehran were literally on fire as well. You can see that on your screens. Just imagine walking down the street and suddenly there are flames coming out from the drain. Even the drains have been set on fire by these toxic strikes which are happening, by the toxic smoke which is coming out from the oil depots. It is terrifying, it is dangerous for anyone who's in the vicinity. These strikes by Israel have left Iran's skies covered in soot, covered in ash, and a thick blanket of black smoke. What is this black rain after all? It is nothing like ordinary rainfall. It is rain that has been chemically altered and made corrosive by pollution in the air. Once in the air, these gases such as sulfur, such as nitrogen oxide, all of this mixes with the water vapor, oxygen, and other chemicals which are there. And this is what causes this black, dark smoke. Sulfur dioxide, that becomes sulfuric acid. Nitrogen oxides, which turns into nitric acid. The acids dissolve into the cloud droplets. And when it rains, it is the black rain. It is the highly acidic black rain. And this is exactly what happened in Iran, in Tehran to be precise, even as we speak, after Israel bombed over 30 oil depots. And humans, unfortunately, have to bear the first of it. Lung inflammation, asthma spikes, bronchial passages weaken under corrosive air. If you inhale this corrosive air, it will definitely lead to a complete breakdown within your own system, especially the immune systems, which will falter. It will leave your body vulnerable to infection from here onwards. Toxic droplets seep into our homes, into the streets, into schools, into workplaces. So imagine what it is doing to not just the ecology, to humanity as well. Then there is, of course, cardiopulmonary strain which would rise. Hearts would struggle under this invisible stress when you are breathing in a toxic smoke, as it has engulfed Tehran today. Breathing itself becomes a hazard. Oil, remember, will lead to toxic air, oil being burnt in this manner. Every time you inhale, you're going to inhale acid and soot. Skins and eyes will be stinging. Children, the elderly, and those with pre-existing conditions are going to be most at risk due to an acid rain. This is the human toil that you'll have to pay the price for. After all, nature is also paying the heaviest price for it. Let's not forget what happens if there is acid rain. Acid rain, as it has been witnessed in Iran, in this, forests will shrivel, leaves will burn, canopies of these trees are going to thin out and slowly die out. It will leave the trees exposed to diseases, to drought. Soil, it's not just the trees, soil itself is going to lose vital nutrients. It's going to weaken the plants and crops, and it's not just now. It will take generations to actually recover from something like this level of poisoning. Lakes also will turn acidic. As we have seen earlier, fish die. Microbial life struggles to maintain balance when there is acid rain like this. Rivers will darken with toxins. They'll turn black. Wetlands degrade and aquatic ecosystems will completely collapse. Birds, insects, smaller animals, all of them are going to lose their food, their shelter, many of them, their very lives as well. What are we learning right now is that the price is being paid by the nature. But there's also a geopolitical context which needs to come in. Who really caused it? Well, it all began with Israel bombing over 30 oil depots of Iran. But now reports are emerging that the US President Donald Trump, that he's not too happy with Israel over these strikes on Iran's oil depot. It is being picked up from Western media that apparently Trump is against the attacks on Iran's oil depots, specifically on the oil depots. That Trump wants to save the oil and not to burn it up is what White House sources have been saying. In fact, it also has been reported that US is very concerned about the footage that we just got you of burning oil depots and the extent of damage that it has done. This is good oil being wasted after all and creating a catastrophe. Also, sources are saying that the attack on depots could possibly spook the oil markets, sending their prices spiraling even higher, that the strikes are far beyond what US had expected Israel to go and do. That US is now getting very concerned about a strike on the civilian infrastructure, that all of this could backfire. Let's not forget, US President Trump had thought that once the strikes begin, there is going to be an internal rebellion in Iran, which will be to overthrow the dispensation of Ayatollah Khamenei and his commanders. That hasn't happened so far. And he fears that with the strikes which were carried out by Netanyahu's Israeli Air Force and Army, that this entire move may just backfire. If suddenly the price of oil goes up in Iran, there's going to be no sympathy left for Israel or US there. But let me remind you how history shows the environmental toll of a war. It's important that we highlight this again. In 1991's Kuwait War, remember the retreating Iraqi forces then had set fire to over 600 oil wells, triggered off acid rains at the time, and soot clouds were spread nearly 2,000 kilometers. It had darkened the skies as far as Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, Afghanistan and Pakistan as well, till India's doorstep. You had these black skies. This is the price that we were forced to pay. We are going to show you how this is not the only one. Earlier as well, during Syria's conflict, from 2013 to 2017, there were strikes on chemical stockpiles and industrial sites which released dangerous pollutants. It triggered off localized acidification. More recently in Ukraine, remember, even there we had seen another ecological disaster in Ukraine. Since the 2022 missile and artillery attacks on industrial tanks have created chemical clouds, releasing sulfur and nitrogen oxides, the very precursors to acid rain. It hasn't seen acid rain, but the precursors are already there because of the toxicity of this war. Across continents, the war has left a toxic legacy in the skies, showing just how conflict transforms air, water, land into a battlefield for Mother Nature to deal with. But remember, viewers, during the apocalyptic 1991 Gulf War, hundreds of Kuwaiti oil refineries, wells, they were deliberately set on fire by Iraq. More than 600 oil wells had burned across Kuwait. It turned the desert into a landscape of towering flames, black smoke. The fire released millions of tons of soot and toxic gases into the atmosphere. There were massive smoke clouds which were spread across the Middle East. It darkened the skies as well. And some of these visuals, you will remember what had happened. We'll put out the visuals of this war that you can see on your screens. This is what had happened at the time when the skies were lit and there was fire in the water. For months at a stretch, some of the regions experienced black rain, acid rain, as polluted particles mixed with moisture in the atmosphere. Well, this is why it's important for us to remember the price of war that we must pay. Well, let me go across to our panelists. Today, joining us on the show, we have Prabhu Dayal, a former diplomat. Also joining us is Burzine Wagma from the SOAS University of London. Burzine Wagma, I'm going to start with you because in October 2024, if you remember, you were on my shows right here on Blueprint Explosive Exclusive. And then you had said, after Iran strikes on Israel, you said, the silence of the Gulf nations is very loud, that it is Iran getting into a strategic hegemonic state, and this is going to cost, the silence is going to cost them dear. Today, we see that the silence is costing not just them, the entire world, unfortunately, even the ecology, very dear.
Thank you, Meghna. And I'm glad you brought the point up of what I mentioned during the October War. The reason which all your viewers might want to know is that Israel took this action because Iran's ballistic missile arsenal requires fuel. And in targeting Iran's jugular, it has been able to show that it can help decrease these attacks by missile arsenals. You see, the current Iranian arsenal is not just solid fuel propellant ones, which are the more advanced ones, but they still depend on liquid fuel. So those are the reasons why Israel would have undertaken this unilateral action, even if President Trump is, as we say, miffed about it. Though, of course, that may be just a blip, because he himself is on record stating that, yes, oil will touch $100 a barrel, but that something like that is to be expected during a crisis of this nature. And we've had one too many Gulf crises where oil has hovered at such prices. Mind you, President Trump may have said that, again, I iterate, but then the US itself has become a natural gas exporter, a net exporter since 2017, and a oil exporter since 2020. So that could work in the US's short-term benefit. Not necessarily medium or long term, I concede, but for the short term. And the US itself has offered New Delhi a 30-day waiver for purchasing Russian crude. So you can imagine the Indians have had the last laugh on the matter, given all this goes back to the sanctions and the toing and froing on Indo-US trade deals and the rest of it.
Well, yes, but who really is having the last laugh? Prabhu Dayal, everyone seems to be very worried about the markets, the crude oil prices, fuel prices, LPG prices, you name it. But very few people are talking about the price that we have to pay ecologically, because this literally seems like an apocalypse when you see the visuals coming out of Tehran. Are we not discussing this enough? Have we not woken up to the extent of catastrophe that we are staring at, looking at the short-term prices of fuel as opposed to the long-term price that we'll have to pay for this kind of a catastrophe ecologically?
Well, Meghna, like Mr. Burzine, let me join him in congratulating you for having a discussion on this topic, which otherwise people don't seem to be bothered about. And I also agree with Mr. Burzine in the sense that he said that while President Trump may be saying certain things as if he is opposed to these strikes on oil targets, what he actually thinks is difficult to know, because he may say something and then be actually wanting something else to be done. Now, I served as Indian ambassador in Kuwait in the 1990s, a few years after the 1991 Gulf War. And people there would recall with horror how the retreating Iraqi forces set fire to over 600 oil wells in Kuwait, resulting in black rain that affected Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait. Now, based on reports which we have seen in the media, Tehran is experiencing toxic, highly acidic rain following airstrikes on oil refineries and storage facilities. So both these incidents involve the massive release of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides into the atmosphere, which react with water to form acidic precipitation. And the environmental consequences are horrendous. Now, both these incidents created black rain laden with soot, unburdened hydrocarbons, and hazardous compounds, causing severe damage to air quality, vegetation, and water supplies. Now, of course, let me point out that the 1991 fires were in sparsely populated deserts.
Right.
But the
Absolutely.
2026 Tehran events impact a densely populated mega city of nearly 10 million people, posing a higher immediate health risk.
Absolutely. That really does put things into perspective. In fact, putting things into further perspective, this may seem tangential, but it's important that we point it out. Despite the fact that you have this kind of targeting of Iranian oil depots, there's blazing skies, there is oil which is set on fire. Imagine this, the AQI in Tehran is currently, even as we speak, lower than the AQI in Delhi. We're looking at the damage that humanity itself has done to the atmosphere. Let me go across to Rohit. Rohit, tell us, what are the AQIs today as we speak, live updates in Tehran, and please do contrast it with Delhi's AQI.
Yes, absolutely, Meghna. In fact, I have both the numbers open right in front of me here. And while the war is going on in the Middle East, this certainly appears to be a wake-up call for people back home here in India, because at the moment, this is as per AQI.in, the AQI of the national capital is at 145, and the air quality right now is poor. This is in the national capital. Contrast that with what's happening in Iran, in Tehran, Iran's capital, where the AQI at the moment is just 32, which means the AQI in Delhi at the moment is roughly 5 times higher as compared to what's happening here in Tehran. Is just AQI of 32 with the air quality still good. And then, of course, if you look at the PM 2.5 numbers as well, PM 2.5 is the particulate matter that is in the atmosphere. And that also, the numbers for Delhi is around 61 microgram per meter cube as compared to just 8 for Tehran. So clearly, even though there's a lot of devastation in Tehran at the moment, the numbers certainly seem to be more concerning back home in India, where the AQI, like I said, is at least 5 times higher at the moment, 149 in Delhi versus 32 in Tehran.
Oh gosh, this is a wake-up call. Thank you so much, Rohit, for getting us the details. Burzeen Vakma, I'm going to come back to you because you have spoken a lot about the 1991 war, and historically these kind of behaviors, the kind of, if you can say, you can preempt what is going to happen based on historical behavior of how these companies, these countries, these very countries have behaved in the past. How does this end? That's all we want to know. How does this end?
Could I just throw in a rejoinder, Ambassador, that there is another ecological crisis brewing and has been doing so, in fact, which has brought Iran to its knees well before even the December 2025 riots and this flashpoint we've seen. In that, 6 years of drought successfully has also brought Iran to this impasse. Tehran's water supply is about, give or take, 10%, and for Mashhad, it hovers at around 3%. I need to throw that in, Meghna, because 19 of Iran's dams are practically empty as we speak and could run out by this summer in itself. So that needs to be factored in. And on to your question of what happens, well, as I pointed out in my opening remarks, Israel undertook this because of the fact that these ballistic missiles require fuel. So in order to cut off the fuel supply to Tehran was why I would imagine this unilateral action was undertaken by Israel, which it did not do so back in the April war 2 years ago, if you recollect, because President Biden had asked Jerusalem to stay its hand, and it did not do so. Whether there was any direct interaction with Trump on this is another matter. But back then, of course, Biden had publicly asked Israel not to attack the Qeshm oil terminal in the Persian Gulf and other facilities like the Abadan facility, which is also Iran's principal oil refinery zone. So that's one thing to be seen. How it ends is that Iran's capabilities have been increasingly degraded. The US and Jerusalem both believe they have air power superiority, which is a fact. All that Iran has in its arsenal are these cheap drones and missiles, which it is depleting very fast by lobbing off here, there, and everywhere, by raking in about 12 countries, as you know, into this fight. What it can do has, in itself, in terms of its own strategy, it has been successful on that perverse point. What it cannot do, what Tehran will not be able to do, and this much I can prognosticate, is to expand the theater of operations. It has maximized its theater of operations and will continue down this path because there's nothing else left.
Yes, many have said that the arsenals of Iran are depleting fast. However, what they may not have in quality, they do make up in quantity when it comes to the cheap drones. But Prabhu Dayal, back to the ecological danger. It's unfortunate. It doesn't seem like the world is waking up to what is in the offing. 1991, yes, we haven't reached that level of the historically ever high oil spill levels that we had seen at the time of the Gulf War, where you yourself were the ambassador of India at the time. But what needs to be done to wake people up? Who's going to wake them up? Trump says that he didn't know, at least his advisors are saying he wasn't aware that this was likely to happen.
Well, you rightly referred to the severe ecological damage which is resulting. Now, Mr. Burzine very correctly pointed out to Iran's strained water reservoirs because of the lack of rainfall. And now the acid rain threatens to contaminate what are already strained in terms of water reservoirs. So the situation is very grim. Now, let me mention that when I spoke to people in Kuwait about the acid rain and what they had undergone at that time, they told me that the fires in 1991 were so colossal, so immense, that they caused a localized nuclear winter sort of effect by dropping temperatures to 10 degrees in some areas. Now, both these scenarios, the one in Kuwait at that time and the one in Tehran now, have resulted in urgent warnings to people to stay indoors with concerns about acute respiratory issues, bronchitis, and long-term lung damage due to inhaling toxic particles. So the scenario is very, very grim.
The scenario is very, very grim, and I'd really like to thank Prabhu Dayal as well as Burzine Wagner for highlighting how it's not just an economic damage and an economic catastrophe that everyone's talking about. It's a larger ecological catastrophe and doom that we may be staring at when visuals like this come in. In fact, there are several memes also which are coming in. It is black humor reigning, as many have said, where everyone's saying that we are sitting here sipping with paper straws. But when it comes to world leaders, this is what they are doing. Literally, they are firing missiles and burning down oil. Go figure the irony behind it all. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us here on the show. And thank you so much, the viewers, for watching.